Hello and welcome to Witchy Wellness Radio. I'm your host, Lauren Chalantani, women's holistic health coach and fellow recovering perfectionist. This podcast was created to show you that your body is not in the way, it is actually leading your way. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Witchy Wellness Radio. And again, I'm your host, Lauren, and you're listening to episode 57, Biohacking Your Health with David Krantz. So, if you're like me, you've probably tried every superfood, every essential oil, even every workout, every type of yoga. You've tried it all. You know, your Pinterest board is filled with pins of life hacks or recipes, but you're kind of left curious if your eating, your working out, your sleeping habits, and everything else that you do is really the best for your body specifically. Well, today's guest, David Krantz, helps us explore the worlds of biohacking and epigenetics, or having a deeper understanding of our own biological makeup that can help us make easy, sustainable lifestyle changes that actually have epic results. In this episode, you will hear about David's calling to become an epigenetic coach, all about endocannabinoids, how genetic testing can improve your health, what actually is epigenetics, the yin and yang energies, how to create your own individualized health plan that actually works, and so much more. And something even more awesome is that David is offering 10% off coaching services to any Witchy Wellness Radio listener. So head over to the link below or to David's website, david-krantz.com/witchy-wellness to sign up for your free consultation and receive 10% off your coaching services. So without further ado, please enjoy episode 57 with David Krantz, Biohacking Your Health. Everybody, back to Witchy Wellness Radio. And again, I'm your host, Lauren Chalantani. And here you learn that your body is not actually in your way, she's leading your way. And today we are talking with David Krantz. He is a certified epigenetic coach, highly sought after expert in the field of individualized genetic-based nutrition, peak performance. And he is a lifelong musician. David sees the various systems of body parts as a complex symphony. As the coach, he excels in helping clients fine-tune parts to create a resonant, harmonious health and harness their creative personal power. An expert in the endocannabinoid system, David is also known for developing proprietary genetic tests that helps understand their unique and individual response to cannabinoids. He is nominated in 2019 as one of the top 100 health innovators by the International Forum of Healthcare Advancement. A biohacker by training and artist by nature, David works with others who have a deep passion for getting the most out of life. I love that. Welcome to the show, David. I feel like we have so much to talk about today.
Thanks for having me on, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I would love, you are into a lot of stuff and stuff that I'm also interested in. How did you get here today, diving into all these really deep scientific, but also I love how you look at it as this harmonious kind of complex symphony as well.
Yeah, so I, like a lot of people in the helping fields, kind of found my way here through having to work on myself and, kind of have the wounded healer archetype in a way, I guess. When I was in my early 20s, I was a touring musician and, was pretty successful, but really let my late night lifestyle get the best of me and was not taking care of my body, was not thinking about what I was putting in my body, was, staying up really late, both to play shows and to write music, and let just a lot of stress, relationship stress too, just all these other little stressors build up. And I had a health crisis. And I was passing out randomly, having nervous system dysfunction. Like, it was really scary, actually. And I went to a bunch of doctors who basically said, you look healthy to me, basically. And no one would really give me a real answer, besides saying, hey, we're just going to see if it goes away. And that wasn't really good enough for me, being someone who is, who, just really curious and not going to take no for an answer in general. And so I got really into health and biohacking and just understanding how I could influence my body in a positive way. And I kind of, I actually kind of put down the music for a little bit, tried to stabilize my life and just get things back to a place where, I could function well. And then a really interesting synchronicity happened where I was listening to all these podcasts, just absorbing podcasts as much as I could. And I was listening to this one in particular called Biohacking for Optimal Health by this Dr. Dan Stickler. And he was an expert in genetics and epigenetics. And the show was really good because I hadn't found a lot of people that really had that perspective. And I was taking a walk one day on my lunch break at work and realized that the logo on the podcast next door, or on the building next door, was the same as the podcast. And this doctor actually had an office next door to me. And so first thing I did was, I booked a call just because I wanted some blood work done with him. I wanted to work with him. And it turned out that they were actually looking to hire someone with an audio skill set and an interest in health, because they were looking to make brainwave entrainment, meditation, relaxation programs, and do some research around sound. They needed someone with the actual production skill set. And so I started working with them, and right around the same time, Dr. Stickler started to develop a training program for coaches, to kind of teach his method. And I was basically just there at the right time. And he was like, hey, do you want to kind of beta test this training program out while I'm, before I make it public? I need someone to kind of bounce ideas off. And I actually said no at first, because I really didn't look at myself as someone who could help with people's health. I wasn't a healer. I was a musician. But kind of convinced me to do it, and actually found that I really loved just the interaction with other people and working on their health in the same way that I'd kind of built my resources back up. And that's kind of how I got to where I am now, just really first figuring out my own stuff, and then just being in the right place to kind of have a mentor take me under his wing in a kind of synchronistic way.
I mean, I love hearing synchronicities like that and how all of our journeys kind of, it's more of a whisper, but you just listen and you see, you're like, oh, catch that. I would have never expected something like that. But it takes that follow through. So if like you're interested in what David has to say or any of these guests, share the podcast, follow up with him. Like, your heart's leading your way. Your body is trying to like speak to you, and you never know where things are going to end up. Which is why I always start off with our guests' background stories, because we can relate to seeing this like hero's journey of how things like beautifully unfolded, but very unexpectedly.
Yeah, and I think that that's so key, listening to your body, listening to those subtle cues. And that is, I think, how most people get to really awesome places, is really listening to the undercurrents. And then occasionally something big like that pops up where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that this is even real. But it's usually a result of the listening to those smaller cues up until that moment.
It's definitely a practice, and sometimes you don't necessarily want to hear it, but those are the times where you get to train your body and you get to feel what a no feels like and a yes feels like, or just a
Hmm.
curious, this caught my eye kind of thing. Back to the work that you do. So you mentioned that you were going through his training program, and now you help other people biohack their own health and kind of get them back to their full and complete self. So if somebody might be interested in working with you, what kind of things do you help coach people through?
hmm So I look at health from the lens of epigenetics, meaning that I'm really looking at how we can optimize genetic expression. And maybe we want to back up and just kind of touch on some of what that really means. And when we can get into like kind of the hard details of it, because I feel like it's just a really empowering way to look at the body and look at health. And this is an area that I think the leading edge practitioners are aware of, but a lot of it really hasn't filtered out into the mainstream yet. So if you're someone who's really interested in, taking an intuitive, holistic approach and combining it with what's really hot right now in the research world, I think this is an area that you really want to pay attention to. When we first discovered the structure of DNA back in the 50s, we had this idea that genes code for proteins, which codes for traits, and everything about your body, everything about your health is kind of hardwired and predetermined. It's almost like the idea of predestiny. Everything is fate. And over the years, really starting in the 80s and an explosion in the past 10 years or so of research, there was this understanding that, okay, that's partially true, but what really matters is the interaction with the environment, the gene environment interaction, because your body is incredibly intelligent and incredibly dynamic in the way that it responds to all of this information that we're giving it, right? All the food we're eating, all the stress we're under or relaxation we're feeling, all the light we're exposed to, all the exercise we do, pretty much all of these things go into changing the way our body functions. And what they found is that this actually happens on the genetic level. There are certain markers that get put onto your genes that change the expression of the proteins these genes create. And that sounds really abstract, but what that means is, say you are we most people listening probably have heard of cortisol. And cortisol is this hormone we associate with stress. We actually don't want too little of it, because then it'd be hard to get up in the morning. The right amount is a good idea. But what happens with cortisol is your body needs to be able to say, all right, make more cortisol. And there are certain neurotransmitters that trigger the release of it. Well, what triggers the release of those neurotransmitters? And there's actually genes that change their expression up and down in response to stress. And so, this is like the idea that, okay, a small acute stressor is good. It's helpful. If you can overcome it, you're probably going to be a little bit stronger next time. It's like exercise. But chronic ongoing stress, if you're trying to run a mile or run a marathon every single day, you're going to get worn out. Um, and so these epigenetic changes are really what underlies those issues from chronic stress. It's what underlies the positive effects from exercise. It's what underlies a lot of the positive effects from eating healthy and maintaining a good stress balance. And you can kind of pin back all of these different factors of health to epigenetic regulation. And it's this common factor, right? It's this thing that ties all these other things together that before we understood this, we were saying, oh, look, these are all kind of separate things. Maybe there's some relationship, but there's not really a clear way that all these things are interconnected. And it gives a lot of credibility to something like acupuncture, where, it's been known that it works for thousands of years and people have great success with it. But Western science has said there's no mechanism for this. We can't understand it. It can't possibly exist because we can't understand it. Well, if you look at genetic expression changes from acupuncture, there are really powerful studies showing, well, that's where the action is. That's what's actually one of the things that's going on, is it's changing genetic expression. And so what I do is I work with my clients, first by understanding what their genome is like, what their DNA is like. We all have individual variants that make us us. And if you understand them, you can get a better idea of what are the things that you can do to create healthier, better genetic expression. And so that's kind of my angle. Is I start with doing a genetic analysis of someone, and we look at individual pieces of your genetic code that we know are associated with, say, a better response to saturated fat versus monounsaturated fat versus polyunsaturated fat, and do kind of like a customized nutrition plan based on that. We look at genes that are related to nutrient utilization and absorption. And so, for example, there's this gene called BCMO1 that uh, converts vitamin A. It converts beta carotene into retinol, the active form of vitamin A in the body. And this is one of those ones where, you see some people do really well on a vegan approach, and then some people are on a vegan diet for a year and they totally crash. And it's because people's body processes nutrients differently. And with this particular gene, um, you need to be able to convert the beta carotene in plants into the usable form in your body. And there's some people that do a very poor, inefficient job of that. And so we identified those specific factors and say, all right, well, you're likely to do well with this, probably not so likely to do well with that. And we just, start by cutting out a lot of the guesswork. And then I work with people over time to implement those changes and stabilize them, and be a accountability buddy and someone who can help set goals, and use that information more in a traditional health coaching context, but we're doing it in a pretty individualized kind of way.
Yeah, because no one person is alike. And I love this concept and this theory of going down to, biohacking down to the genes as well. And I think a customized diet and lifestyle, but also, so I'm like a meditation nerd, and
Hmm.
I love talking epigenetic changes through meditation.
Hmm.
And it's so beautiful. You can do this and optimize for your body through lifestyle and outward habits and what you put into your body. But mindfulness practices, getting yourself into this like rest and restore mode and like relaxing your nervous system can actually turn off and on and regulate certain genes. And that's how I got into epigenetic research, was like, whoa, like I can like heal my body, I can reprogram my mind, I can create a whole new life if I wanted to, just by turning on and off genes. And it's not an active thing like you're sitting there like, I'm going to turn on, not, it's the act of like becoming present and letting go and really surrendering into that present moment. And for me, I've read a lot of Bruce Lipton's work. He was like the guy who kind of coined the term epigenetics.
He was a pioneer
Yeah,
talking about this stuff before anyone thought it was real. He was, yeah.
yeah, The Biology of Belief. I think that's his first big book that I would recommend to people who are like might be interested in more of this stuff. Um, but yeah, I think it's such, epigenetics is such a interesting topic, because like you said, we started this research with DNA thinking that it was like this predetermined, or evolution took a very, very long time. Like it took humanity to get so long to get here. But what we're seeing with, I mentioned the study all over again. I think, I can't remember where I read it, but it might have been in Nature. It was one of the bigger science publications with, emotional memories or responses can be, now they're actually able to record the epigenetic response up to 7 generations down the line. So something happening to your great, 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 great ancestor emotionally can be passed down. And like you said, like they had no way of really determining how acupuncture works. There's no mechanism that they said, but now we're seeing all these scientific research and journals and publications coming out that like, oh, there's actually more than what we thought to all of this, and actually proving these things that, you know, Eastern medicine and these yogis were preaching for years. So yeah, that's my little 2 cents on epigenetics. I would love to steer and hear more into your in-depth perception of epigenetics, and kind of on top of a diet approach, how do you use that in your own life, and like what interests you, or like anything new you would love to share about that field?
Sure, sure. So I'm totally on the same page with you around the meditation and relaxation response with the epigenetics and how powerful that is. And I see it as one of those things that really acts as glue to all of these other things, right? Because what's so cool about epigenetics is like you can look at, say, one gene that's associated with inflammation. Say it's an anti-inflammatory gene that you want turned on. Well, you can influence that through meditation. You can probably influence it through food. You can probably influence through exercise. You can probably influence it through sleep. Like it's sensitive. This one gene is sensitive to all these inputs. So I love it because it kind of levels the playing field and says, well, we can hit it with all these different things. Why don't we do all of them? Why don't we do all of them at once? And stuff like meditation, where you're seeing it does have, I mean, I've seen studies showing effects on thousands of different genes with regular meditation. Um, it acts as another way to impact that. And you know the ability for us to change our story, and really do that through the emotional lens is so powerful. And just and when you think about therapy, being in a relationship with a therapist, there's really awesome studies now showing that there are epigenetic changes that happen in certain genes just from being in that supportive, positive relationship. And I say just, but that's a massive way to change the way that you respond to the world. And that's really what this is. It's like we're changing our response within our body and to the external world, and it's all just this one holistic encoded thing. It's like what you're describing with the emotional changes passed from generation to generation. I love thinking about it in this term. And there's a guy named Mario Martinez, Dr. Mario Martinez, who I think your listeners would also really appreciate if they're into any of this stuff. And he posits this idea of the biocognitive model, meaning that when you have an emotion, well, you also have thoughts that go with it, but you also have certain neurochemistry that goes with it. You also have certain hormones that goes with that particular thing. You also have certain feelings in the body, and you can access and change that whole picture through any of those means. And it's more powerful when you kind of do them together. It's like engaging with your body while you're doing things that might change biochemistry and hormones with nutrition and all that kind of stuff. It all just stacks on top of each other. But he really looks at it as like, okay, if we're um, used to being stressed out all the time, and then we have kids, well, their bodies are going to be prepared to be stressed out again. They were to be stressed out. Like it's like we try and pass on what might be useful to offspring. I'm actually a grandchild of Holocaust survivors on my mom's side. My grandfather was in concentration camps. He was in Auschwitz and escaped 2 weeks before it was liberated. Like he was fully in it. And when you look at the studies around the stress response of children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, they show all these epigenetic changes related to heightened stress response, differences in cortisol genes, things like that. And I kind of attribute it actually to potentially being a kind of a risk factor for some of the stuff that I experienced, what I described earlier, like in my early 20s, like having nervous system dysfunction and having some of those issues. Like I was probably primed, in a way to experience that and just have a more activated sympathetic nervous system, being on guard, being on alert. Like it just kind of makes sense that we would, have that as a built-in preparedness mechanism. So when you really think about what this is in relationship to trauma, intergenerational trauma, and how it just compounds and compounds until you break the cycle, until you make a conscious decision to say, hey, I'm going to not just change my emotional state, but change all of the underlying biochemistry that reinforces that biochemistry, or reinforces the emotional state, reinforces the relationship patterns. And, you can kind of look at it at any one of those levels and say, I'm going to change this piece and maybe it'll have an influence on here. But if I consciously focus on all these things at once and do it, it's like you get this accelerated way of shifting and changing your reality and changing the way you relate to yourself and others. And that's really, I just love connecting with other people like you that understand that. And, it's cool. But one thing too is like, um, a lot of the quote unquote biohacking health world is very young, very like, we're gonna like take control over all this stuff. And there's not necessarily the attention to the yin, meditation and intuitive, really tapping into that. But when you combine those things, and it's like, again, you can look at it as a metaphor for just about all of life here. When you really take and honor the yin and the yang together and see how, okay, we can make these active changes, but also learn how to focus more on our intuition and see how these things are interrelated. Like usually when I do genetic reads for people, there's something that comes up where like, oh, I'd kind of thought of that maybe might be true, but I never had any data to back it up. And so it's funny how sometimes people's intuition actually will be confirmed by doing a genetic analysis. Yeah, really focusing on how to combine those two modalities, like the masculine and the feminine, within this type of work is really the where I see the most benefit for people and what I try and bring to it.
Yeah, I see with my health coaching clients, I help a lot of women who are like myself, who are very passionate and very driven and have like completely disconnected from their yin and are like, I'm gonna eat my body's weight in kale, I'm gonna go win at yoga class, and like very like go 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 go. And it's like, okay, even if you are biohacking or like being mindful about what you put into your body, it's like you have to realize that it's both. Like you said, it's, you can't be in the sympathetic nervous system and like stressed out while you're eating. And a lot of people, women I work with, have digestion issues. And metaphysically, I believe in, as my own healing journey, is that it was like undigested stress and emotions that you're not processing. And everybody now is like, oh, I gotta beat the bloat, or that's everyone. I think it's just commonplace, but I think we're just such a solar society in this masculine, like we're always on, going, that we don't actually take time to digest life, to digest our food, to digest what's going on internally. And also people who are very empathic, it adds a whole nother layer on top of the generational stuff. It's like, am I internalizing someone else's, or is this mine? So I really like, for me, my own journey helping other people is like, all right, we got this like matter to matter approach maybe down pretty well. Like people will come to me and say, all right, I do the best on XYZ foods. I definitely cannot eat ABC foods. Like, help me. Like, I'm already doing all of the things. How can we go inward and calm down so our body's primed to be able to actually like handle these things? And I think what you do, biohacking, helps so much with people to actually figure out what lifestyle choices and diets can help get them to that level, so that going inward is gonna combine. Because even you know meditation can only get you so far if you're nutritionally deficient. And I think the world, especially US, we're overfed, but we're malnourished. And I see that so much. And even in myself, I eat mostly plant-based, but I still supplement with actually a lot of like animal-based supplements to help, with my B vitamins and all a slew of other stuff. But I do feel better, even eating the same diet, meditating, that extra edge of like making sure my body is absorbing and actually like getting all the nutrients that it needs. Do you work at all with like biohacking with like supplementation? Because I know even eating an all organic diet, like our soil is so nutritionally depleted now than it was 50, 100 years ago. And this is a whole new other podcast. And as you can tell, I'm very passionate about that.
Yes, we're on the same page about soil depletion and non-sustainable agricultural practices and the hole that we've dug ourselves in nutritionally because of it. But yes, I do a lot of work with supplementation, and it's a core foundation of what I do with people because the genetics are such a powerful way to really look at these pathways in the body very precisely that ordinarily you would have no access to. You would have no understanding of antioxidant pathways or things that could mitigate cellular stress. And we look at specific strategies, both with nutritional supplements, but also with herbs and other, things that can really help rev up energy and metabolism because you're just giving the body something that genetically, you might be predisposed to produce less of. And I'll give you an example with this. Like, there's this gene called SOD2 that produces this enzyme called superoxide dismutase. And it's this really important enzyme that sits in the mitochondria, which helps produce energy for your cells. And what SOD does is it basically eliminates waste products from that process, from energy. If you think about any energy production process, think about a power plant, there's waste products, and your cells are no different. And you have enzymes like this in your cells that kind of keep the production process clean. Well, there's this variant in SOD2 where some people produce 40% less SOD. And I happen to be one of those people. And one of the things in nature that contains really high amounts of SOD, it's actually kind of a rare thing in plants, is chaga mushroom. And the first time I ever tried chaga, this was before I did a genetic analysis. The first time I ever tried chaga, I felt amazing. Like I felt like I was just lit up, like I was high, like it was amazing. And my partner at the time had some too, and she didn't really feel anything. And she was like, "Yeah, this is nice. I like the taste, but like I'm not feeling it like this." And when we did our genetics later on, we found that I had the genetics associated with the SOD deficiency, and she had kind of the normal ones. So what I experienced was this crazy, like, all of a sudden being flooded with something my body wasn't making enough of, and she already had enough of it, so she didn't care. But it's like being able to look at 50 or 60 of those different things together and saying, oh well, you could probably benefit from boosting these 5 things, and don't waste your time on those supplements because you're good there. It's kind of what I do. And also what you were saying about just fueling your body to take advantage of the emotional benefits of something like meditation and um or therapy or anything that you're doing on a emotional healing level. It gives you the headspace. It really opens up the mental energy to process that stuff. And I mean, that's what I experienced. Kind of, it was fun, so I think some people, you can start either way. Some people, do the emotional healing first and then realize, oh well, my body could probably feel better too. I happen to be the opposite, where I started with the nutritional changes, started with the biohacking supplement stuff, and then all of a sudden I realized that I had all of these maladaptive coping mechanisms that I had never addressed and all of this unprocessed trauma, that all of a sudden I actually felt like I had the headspace to deal with. It was like all that stuff that I was repressing, and like why I was smoking weed like 8 times a day as a teenager. Like why the reason why I was doing that stuff is because I wasn't able to handle that stuff. And when I was able to really fuel my brain and body in a way that gave me a little bit extra clarity, it was like that stuff actually became a lot easier, and a lot, I could actually hold space for it. And it really changed the dynamics with my own internal psyche and the relationship to my body. And I find that so often now with clients where it's about the both and of this really fitting these pieces together.
Yeah, I was the same way. I was like, I went I was probably vegetarian for about 5 years before, but I went like strict vegan, almost raw vegan
Hmm.
for a while, and which, I did fairly well on, and then all this emotional stuff like kind of calmed down. Like my chronic anxiety calmed down to a point, and then I was like, "Oh, I feel like I can actually see these issues for what they are." And I mean, it's not easy, but I knew that like, okay, I got my body feeling this well, or I lost this weight, I got my digestion to this point, but here are these other things. It's just this big holistic picture. Um, and I've had experiences where my body, I was doing the whole holistic thing, eating healthy, supplementation, working out. But when something, I stepped into a previous relationship where it was not for me, it was not serving me, and my body's health freaked
Hmm.
out. And I'm like, I'm literally doing all of the things right, and what's going on? And that's why I started the show, is kind of after the fact of like, your body, is very wise. It's trying to help you. Somebody like you helping through biohacking, but also metaphysically or emotionally, like it's reacting because the state that your head and your emotions are in, and you don't realize how intertwined every single thing is. And yeah, I think those issues were resolved like within like weeks of me leaving that relationship, and they haven't popped up since. So it's kind of like, all right, our body's a lot wiser than we think we give it credit for. Um, um, so if somebody was interested in working with you, you kind of led into like, you kind of do like a little report of like their genetics and like biohacking. Um, so what kind of all does it entail? Do you work on them with like a one-on-one basis, or is it like more of like a program that you kind of guide them through?
So I have some different options for people depending on what they're interested in. Some people will just do a genetic analysis, and we'll meet once and go over it and say, hey, here's the things that are most likely to help your body. Here are the things you should probably stay away from. But then I also do have some programs where we take that information and we also do some lab work with it, and then track those labs over a period of time, usually 6 or 12 months, and then do regular check-ins once or twice a month, and just continue to refine the process and really figure out, okay, what are going to be the highest impact items first? What are your goals right now? Let's work on that first, and then we'll kind of add some more things in over time. And so yeah, both of those options start with a genetic test, and it's a simple cheek swab test that you can do at home. And the company that I'm affiliated with and use their tests, I selected it because it is 100% privacy secure. You own your data. It's definitely sketchy out there in the world of the 23andMe's right now, and um, I am very concerned with that. So the company I use is very good about managing data and making sure that you have 100% control over it. Um, but yeah, that's what I do with people, and it really is about what people want out of it. And I customize programs for you and for what your specific needs are.
And not to get too much in like the fear based of that, but just if you could explain to us a little bit, because I think 23andMe is so popular in those type of programs. Could you kind of explain a little bit of why you would want to use a service like the one you provide? Because I don't think people really understand what's going on there with the data privacy.
Yeah, sure. So I actually can use 23andMe data as well. If anyone is out there listening and has done their 23andMe, they don't really show you this, but they actually analyze a whole lot more genetic variants on the back end that you can download, and I can use that data. But 23andMe's business model is built on providing really inexpensive tests and then selling data to pharmaceutical companies. So when you sign up with 23andMe, which is the biggest genetic testing service in the United States, you are signing away your data privacy rights essentially. So you actually don't technically own your data. 23andMe technically owns your data. And so what we do is we take no ownership of your data. You own all of it. We have no rights to sell it. We have absolutely no stake in it. And we actually store it on a separate server that the lab never even has access to your personal data. Like, we keep everything very separate. And we actually delete records out of our system every 3 months so that there's absolutely no chance of there being like a data breach in your information, anything like that. So we just take all the precautions. But yeah, I mean, it's you kind of got to, I think this is changing when you look at some of the newer genetic startups out there that are more sensitive to this kind of thing. The landscape is going to change hopefully here, but yeah, Ancestry, 23andMe, their business model is all built on selling your data.
Always follow the money. That's what I
Mhm.
say. um, well, awesome. Did you have anything else you wanted to cover before we kind of wrapped everything up today?
No, this has been great. I really appreciate the conversation, and it's always just nice talking to someone who's on the same page. And it's funny. I feel like we separate these things into biohacking and metaphysics and emotional stuff, and it and people think about these things as separate things, but when you think about it from the epigenetic perspective, like, it really starts to make all of those things really just part of the same picture, because they're all influencing the same kind of common pathway. So just when you were saying, those different things, I was like, huh, I don't even think about it like that. I just think about all those things as information that the body is, processing. And I think it just gives us more of a holistic way of thinking about it, like a less disconnected way of thinking about it, and gives us more of an opportunity to leverage the amazing synergy of all these different tools out there.
For sure. Well, thank you again for coming on and allowing me to like nerd out with you and listen to a different perspective, a different part of that puzzle piece, a holistic puzzle piece. And as always, we're so grateful for you showing up for yourself, but also for everybody else, for us as the listeners, for your clients and potential clients. And I always end each show of asking how may we, the listeners, be of service as an act of gratitude for you today, for your time and your wisdom.
I think the thing that comes up for me is just to be curious and really let yourself be led by curiosity. Whatever it is that you're excited about learning about or excited about exploring, like, just do it. Follow that spark, follow that sense of, I wonder if this is, good for me or interesting, and just check that out. Because I feel like my life has been so enriched by not putting boundaries on what my curiosity is leading me towards. Just as someone who, has explored music and explored health and has a lot of different interests, I've really found a lot of benefit from that. So yeah, I just say, be curious. And if anyone wants to connect, I offer free 30-minute consultations on my website. You can go to david-krantz, krantz.com. And if you're curious about anything we talked about today, just, happy to have a conversation and see if any of the epigenetic coaching or genetic testing is right for you, and, what your specific goals are.
Amazing. Thank you again. And as always, if you guys were interested in any of these topics, make sure to reach out to David. Everything will be in the show notes. But if this really resonated with you and you thought of a loved one or a friend, please pass it along, because you never know what little bit of inspiration, like you just said, follow that curiosity and how it might lead somebody that you love to their own self-realization or transformational journey. But thank you again, David, for coming on the show. It was so nice talking with you today.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure. Thank you.